Welcome to Eggs and Issues, a monthly business program presented by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. Eggs and Issues is supported by presenting sponsors Bank of America and Martins Point Healthcare, in cooperation with Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, First Light Fiber, and WEX. Reception sponsors Key Bank, Clark Insurance, and Veraldana. Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneurs sponsors AAA Northern New England and Springborn Staffing Center. Community Corner sponsor Baker Newman Noise. Parking is provided by CV and Mahar Engineers. Our exclusive radio sponsor, WGAN. Listen weekday mornings to Ken and Matt on the WGAN Morning News. Print sponsor, The Forecaster. TV sponsor, WMTW. And e-media sponsor, Maine Biz. Special community partners, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, the University of Southern Maine, and Southern Maine Community College. And now, please welcome Portland Community Chamber of Commerce President, Jack Lufkin.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see a good crowd for this topic here today, continuing on with the trade theme. As mentioned, I am Jack Lufkin, and welcome to Eggs and Issues. I'm the volunteer president of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. We do have a great program. We've got a moderator and a panel discussion. I'm going to introduce some folks up to the stage here in just a minute. But a couple of housekeeping items first. As a reminder, we do have on your tables a listing of the upcoming Chamber events, and you can find out more info and sign up for those things at the Chamber's website, portlandregion.com. So I want to take a moment here to talk about something fairly serious. We continue to hear from our members that advocacy efforts are among the most valued services that we offer. And one thing I want to briefly matter is many of you know I've talked from the podium before about the engagement that we've had around the Portland mandating a paid sick leave ordinance. Excuse me. This ordinance was drafted by a couple of special interest groups and was advanced by Mayor Strimling, and it's finally going to the full council this coming Monday. We need you to weigh in. If passed, this ordinance will affect all companies that have locations and employees in the city, regardless of where that company is headquartered. Among the many significant and costly problems with this ordinance, consider the implications it will have for companies and employees that already enjoy flexible PTO, or paid time off programs, which is probably most of us in this room. If you have employees in Portland, you'll be mandated to provide 5 sick days to every Portland employee, full-time, part-time, seasonal, per diem, it doesn't matter. Because this time can only be used for sick time, companies will need to track and record when employees accrue and take sick time to ensure compliance with the ordinance. So a straight, flexible PTO benefit plan will not satisfy the requirements of this ordinance, likely resulting in the loss of PTO days to account for the new sick time accrual. We think that's a loss for both the employers and the employees. Making Portland an outlier and more costly place to start and run a business is just too harmful, especially considering that right now the state legislature is working on this very same issue. They've been deliberating a paid sick leave law that is much more balanced than what the city is considering, which, if enacted, would maintain a level playing field across the state rather than burdening just those companies and Portland employees and potentially costing Portland taxpayers more to create their own bureaucracy to enforce compliance. By way of example, the state proposal would provide a straightforward exemption for employers who already offer at least 5 days of PTO. We strongly encourage the Portland City Council not to adopt the ordinance before them and allow time to determine the result of the potential state legislative action. And we ask that you reach out to our Portland City Councilors and voice your concerns on this ordinance. Moving on, something much more fun. For the past couple of months, I've talked about Portland Professional Connections, and this is an effort with the Portland's Office of Economic Opportunity to connect foreign professionals with local professionals. And you've heard me ask for volunteers to be connectors. Well, on May 2nd, the Chamber will be hosting a summit for employers who are interested in tapping into the foreign-trained professional community. We will talk about cultural competency, unique barriers to this talent pool, and best practices on hiring, retaining, and promoting foreign-trained professionals. The summit will be held from 8 until 2 on May 2nd, 8 a.m. till 2 p.m., May 2nd, Hannaford Hall, University of Southern Maine. And of course, more information is available on the Chamber's website. April is also Earth Month, and in honor of this, I'm pleased to say that the Maine Green Power Program has provided enough renewable energy to power all of the remaining Eggs and Issues events through 2019. Maine Green Power is the voluntary green power option for electricity that's available to Maine homes and businesses. It's sponsored by the Maine Public Utilities Commission. I'd like to thank Kay Mann, Outreach Coordinator at the Maine Green Power Program, who helped make this possible. Although I apologize that we went against her wishes and we did not call this Green Eggs and Ham. So, yeah. I just read it. Now, a very proud moment for us and everyone connected with the Chamber. The Chamber continues to grow, and I would like to just recognize a number of members who have joined the Chamber in the past month. Elizabeth Peavy, Communication Consulting, Maine Duck Tours, Fox Family Dental, the Dogfish Bar and Grill Spirits, Inc., Youth and Family Outreach, Intercultural Community Center, In Her Presence, Pine Tree Recovery Center, Women United Around the World, Kishu Wazo, March of Dimes, the Maine State Chapter, Anytime Fitness Northgate, KR Crossing, Simply Sized Homes, Maine Oyster Company, The Public Works, Paul Designs Project, Crystal Joys, Healthcare Purchaser Alliance of Maine, and First Vehicle Services. We welcome you and look forward to working alongside you. AAA Northern New England and Springborn Staffing provide support for our Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneurs program, which allows area high school and college students to attend Eggs and Issues. With us today, we have students from the University of Southern Maine, Falmouth High School, and Gorham High School. If you're with any of those organizations, would you please stand and let us recognize you? And I'll just note that when we get to the Q&A section, you guys always ask the best questions, so don't hesitate getting up to the podium. And much appreciation to Headlight AV, who provides us with all of our technical support. The video from today's Eggs and Issues will be available later this week on the Chamber's YouTube channel and on the Chamber website. The Portland Public Library is our FMI sponsor. Later this week, you'll receive an email providing additional information regarding today's topic from the talented folks, the research librarians over at the Portland Public Library. We really appreciate that. Baker Newman & Noyes sponsors our Community Corner program today. Today, our featured organization is Youth and Family Outreach. Youth and Family Outreach has been a part of the Bayside community for over 150 years. They're located in the old church on the corner of Cumberland and Preble Streets. Youth and Family Outreach supports the whole family, 53% immigrant and refugee families, in a cozy, uniquely diverse environment where nearly half of their staff speak languages other than English. Youth and Family Outreach is also developing Portland's workforce as they support parents through certification and direct employment opportunities. Youth and Family Outreach wants to be sure you know one more thing. It's not enough. More quality childcare slots are needed to support parents transitioning to work. Introducing Youth and Family Outreach's campaign for a brighter future, a comprehensive plan to double the Youth Family Outreach childcare capacity and create a community hub where multiple services are available all in one place. This is the future of Bayside and of Youth and Family Outreach, and we here at the Portland Community Chamber couldn't be more pleased to share this vision with you here today. If you'd like to learn more about this, there are cards at everyone's table setting, but you can also reach out to the folks at Youth and Family Outreach or visit their website at yfoutreachme.org. Thank you for being here. Now, on to today's presentations. As a reminder, there will be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions of the panelists. Please use one of the two or three microphones that we have throughout the room. Please say your name. If you're with a company or you're affiliated with an organization, we ask that you state that and ask your questions. And the kind folks in the back will give us a warning when we only have time for one more questions. So what I'd like to do is introduce the moderator and all of the panelists, and then I'll welcome them up to the stage all at once. So Wade Merritt is the Executive Director of the Maine International Trade Center, and he will be our moderator this morning. And our panelists are Tselikis. I probably butchered that. I'm very sorry. Annie is the Executive Director from the Maine Lobster Dealers Association. Kevin Therrin, Senior Director, Global Supply Chain at IDEXX. And Kent Peterson, President and CEO of Fluid Imaging Technologies, Inc. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome everyone to the stage.
Well, good morning, everybody. As introduced, and thanks for that, Jack. And thanks again also to Quincy for having us here today. I'm Wade Merritt. I'll be your moderator this morning. I'm president of the Maine International Trade Center. I am also serve as the Director of International Trade within the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. I was going to say it's great to see so many faces today, but I literally can only see three. I can kind of make you guys out. I'm going to have bright green spots in my eyes for the rest of the day today. But it is great to see so many people here today. And thanks again to our friends at the Portland Chamber for putting this together. I'm here with several members of the Trade Center team. I think we've got some staff and some board members kind of down here in the front, kind of scattered back through the audience. I would tell you to raise your hand, but I wouldn't be able to tell whether you did or not anyway. But there are several folks here today who can answer questions about the Trade Center and talk to you about the great work that we do. So hopefully you've had a chance to connect with one of them ahead of time, or we'll have some time to talk about with them after today's session. So when I first started, I first told my wife and daughter I was going to be doing eggs and issues. They wanted to know if I would be talking about my issues with eggs. I have a lot of issues with eggs. I don't like the taste of them. I don't like the smell of them. I can't stand them. But I said, no, we're going to be talking about things that are far more interesting than my food aversions. So we're going to be here today to talk about international trade and what Maine is doing on the global landscape. So before we move on, before I introduce the panel, just a couple remarks from our perspective as the International Trade Center. Believe it or not, we have just passed the first tariffversary. I wish I could say that I came up with that term. I didn't. I stole it from a podcast that I listened to from the Peterson Institute. There is actually a tariffversary song. I will spare you that. But it's hard to believe that it's already been a year since we started seeing trade and trade policy kind of migrate from the back page of the business section to at least the front page of the business section, if not the front page of the paper altogether. The last 12 months, I think it's safe to say, have been rather unprecedented in terms of international trade and trade policy. Since the passage of NAFTA, and if you can believe this, the passage of NAFTA was 25 years ago, with some limited bumps, the policy landscape, the way the world in which internationally active companies work, has been fairly stable. Maybe not the commercial environment always, but the policy environment has been relatively stable. The work that we do at the Trade Center, exporting, working with companies on international, has been kind of keeping on for several years, many years in fact. And then last March happened. First, the steel and aluminum tariffs after a Section 232 national security investigation, which placed additional duties on imported materials. And a couple of weeks later, the comprehensive investigation of Chinese business practices, which ended up attaching duties to $250 billion of Chinese imports in a phased process. China and many of our other trading partners retaliated against American products. The rest was history. Well, actually not history, it's kind of the current reality that my friends here from the business community are facing on a daily basis. In the background, lots of other international issues. Brexit continues to roil the European side of our international trade linkages. Revised NAFTA, the USMCA, has been negotiated. Could begin its journey through Congress in the next few months. It's likely to face some headwinds in Canada because of the steel and aluminum tariffs. It's a really interesting environment in which we find ourselves, in which our business community is finding itself. The important thing, however, and I do want to try to make sure that we communicate this, it's not all bad news, because we like to talk about the things. The bad news does tend to sell newspapers. Sorry, Pete, I know I saw you in here. The bad news tends to get the headlines, or for those of you who are younger than me and don't read newspapers, gets the clicks. But the reality is that for all the uncertainty, our exports were actually up 4% last year, which was a fairly solid performance. Maine exports just under $3 billion a year, about 2.9, which is 6% of what we produce and 30% of what we process or manufacture. It is a significant portion of the state's economy. The products that we send abroad are diverse. Lobster and wood, of course, that's what Maine is kind of known for, but also biomedical, advanced materials, wide range of niche manufactured items. This is partly why we've chosen the guys who are up here with us today to kind of really talk about it's not just natural resource-based products. Natural resources are important, but it's also manufactured as well. For those of you who are not familiar with the Trade Center, we were formed over 20 years ago with a very simple sounding mission: to connect Maine's businesses and communities to international opportunities. We assist over 300 companies each year with everything from how to complete export documentation, full market studies, and we do in-state efforts like our Global EU Education series and also bringing companies abroad. I would be remiss, and my staff is going to kill me if I don't mention the fact that we will be right back here in this room in May for the 38th Annual Maine International Trade Day, where we'll be talking about Maine's future in the global economy, specifically how Maine's marine technologies and forest products industries will be able to evolve, whether we're talking about nanocellulose or alternative ways of using the resource for products as diverse as food, biomedical, and the fashion industry even. So we hope that we'll be able to see you here on May 24th. So you're about to hear from the panel. Maine has a lot to offer the world, whether it's as a tourism destination or a place to go to school or a place to invest. And it's our job to put a face on the state that we love. So how do we do that? Before we move on, and I swear we're moving on to the panel next, I wanted to show you quickly a very short video, it's 2 minutes I promise, of how we introduce Maine to a global audience. So I hope you enjoy it. Pretty great video, huh? Sounds like a place that I'd like to live and work. We certainly do. I saw at least 2 of you in there. I see the lobster industry. Obviously, we had IDEXX. I hope there's a flow cam in there somewhere again. Great video. To say that the reception that video receives when we travel abroad and show that to an international audience is remarkable, actually. The jaws drop. We get the applause lines, the applause for it as well. It shows us well, and I think it definitely captures the essence that we're trying to portray, that it's not always just about the lighthouses. There's a lot of exciting things going on here. So enough from me, I promise. Now it's time to move on to our panelists. And I'm going to introduce them from end to end here. as soon as I can find what I was going to say next. There we go. So we got two of our 2,200 exporters in Maine here with us today, one large and one small, as well as a representative of our state's leading export. None of them are wilting lilies. They're probably dying to get off this chair and start talking, so I'm glad that they're here with us. I'm really excited to hear what they have to say about their experiences overseas and how they're managing the trade environment, so I hope you are as well. At the far end, we have Kent Peterson, President and CEO of Fluid Imaging Technologies in Scarborough, manufacturer of high-tech equipment for analyzing nano and microparticles in fluids. They're active in over 50 countries worldwide. Great small business export success story. Former MITC board member, so thanks for being here with us, Kent. Kevin Therrin's in the middle with Global Supply Chain Director for IDEXX Laboratories. I'm sure most of you know about IDEXX, but in case you've been living in a cave, they're one of Maine's leading companies and develop, manufacture, and distribute products for a number of different industry sectors in animal, veterinary, water, and dairy. They employ over 7,000 people worldwide and sell in 175 different markets. And certainly last but not least, Tselikis from the Maine Lobster Dealers Association. Lobster is Maine's single largest exported product with over $500 million sent outside the US in 2018. It was also the product most affected by the Chinese retaliatory tariffs. 99% of the impact of the Chinese tariffs on Maine struck the lobster industry, which has had some pretty far-reaching effects. Annie, you've been with me for all 3 iterations of this panel.
We've done this song and dance a few times.
We have done this song and dance a few times, but thank you for coming back here with us again. So thanks to all 3 of you for being here. So you guys have seen the questions, and I kind of talked to you a bit about the order in which we're going. So we're going to start with you, Annie. And the first question was, so what does international trade mean to the lobster industry? And I mean this in a couple different ways. How does the industry interact with the global market? And how important is it to the businesses?
I would approach this in 2 ways. The lobster industry has been very fortunate and very successful in the last 10, 15 years. For those of you who read the paper and see stories about what our annual landings are, what the carrying capacity of the fishery is, the growth of the business sector in this industry, you will know that that lobster supply has increased pretty exponentially over the course of the last 10, 15 years. And there are many reasons for this, but it is essentially hundreds of years of good stewardship of the resource, and a changing system where we're seeing less predation on the animal in the natural environment here in the Gulf of Maine. So biologically, as an industry that is dealing with natural resources, we are in a very, very good position. This is also a very unique position when you compare the lobster industry to wild capture fisheries worldwide. So while Maine has been increasing, a lot of other wild capture fisheries have been on the decline. But with that growth in supply, we have had to find more homes for that product. And the growth has been in exports. And the story starts way before China was even a player in the scene. Businesses here have been exporting to Europe for a very long time. I would say that some of those companies have relationships with the European market lasting over 30 years. In the 90s and early 2000s, Japan was a very big market for us, and China is a newer player in that sphere, and it's largely due to improved logistics. It's better marketing, it's better shipping conditions, but the growth for our business has really come from exports, and it has allowed this industry to really, really become much more robust than it would be without that market.
It's a really interesting point. I mean, because we kind of talk about or think about the lobster export thing as being sort of a new thing. I'm glad you point out the 30 years. I saw actually randomly the Bangor airport posted a letter hailing the first lobster shipment out of Bangor. It was like in 1985 or something like that. I mean, this does go back quite a long ways, although we've been talking about the international market quite a bit recently. Kevin, IDEXX has a kind of a different story. You guys, in essence, were born as an international company. And you gave me a couple of good tidbits, which I won't steal, but what's IDEXX experience? No, I'm not going to steal your thunder. No, I'm not stealing your thunder, man.
First, Wade, thanks for inviting me to the panel today, and thanks to the Chamber for inviting us all here. IDEXX has always been an international company. Not everyone knows that. Like most companies, they would start out locally, they would grow, and then they would find themselves in an international, or finding that there were opportunities internationally. But IDEXX's first sale was actually in Japan, so our first dollar was actually our first yen. And since then, it has always been an international company. We are 40% of our revenue is now international. But we're continuing to grow both in the United States and in the international markets. So we'll look for every opportunity where they might exist in each of those, in both the U.S. and internationally. And we'll continue to monitor all of those opportunities as they come forward. So thanks.
Yeah, that's great. And Kent, question for you. Like, so how important is this for fluid imaging? I mean, we've known each other for a really long time. I think back to your first days at fluid imaging. But maybe you could tell the folks, like, what does this mean for a smaller company?
International business is very important. It's integral to our strategy. We manufacture our FlowCam instrumentation in Scarborough, yet we sell into over 50 countries. It provides excellent geographic diversification. One of our initial applications was in oceanographic research. That's an international community, so to the extent we were successful here in Maine, we went to other countries because of professional publications that they made based on the instruments. So we have decided that not only for the oceanographic application, but also some of our industrial applications, rather than stick to one vertical or one market. The business strategy was participate in the international marketplace, smooth out any vagaries or policy changes that may come our way.
So how does a company, what does this look like when a small company like yours goes abroad? You know, we kind of have a sense of how this looks for IDEXX, who I know has offices in a number of different countries. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. Fluid imaging doesn't, so I assume there's going to be, how do you make the sales and how do you get the things over there?
Well, we have a direct sales force that is based here in the United States. However, we've contracted with approximately 25 commission sales agencies covering almost 60 countries around the world. And we work with them, support them. It involves a lot of course, communication, support. When we do ship from Maine, we oftentimes travel there for installation, training, support. But to the extent we can get mind share from these agents, which have other products to represent, it bodes well for us to stay in contact, so they will think of us, think of applications, sell our product in their country, respective territory, on our behalf, yet we interact with them through communication and frequent travel.
Yeah, very good. Annie, I'm sorry I improvised this question. I'm going to do this to you too. So what does that look like for the lobster industry? Is it something similar to how Kent's laid this out, or is this different?
We typically have gone through a variety of patterns that have included a combination of trade missions, trade shows, and customer visits, and piggybacking some of those things on top of each other. So for example, when a company goes to Brussels for an annual seafood trade show, or to Hong Kong, they might decide to stay on for a trade mission that might have been jointly sponsored by the Maine International Trade Center and Food Export Northeast. Or would go and visit customers and coordinate their own visits. But because our companies are largely very small and employ a few salespeople per company, it really is about building relationships with your customer base there and having that coordination back and forth and building that trust, which is a lot of work. And so when we talk about building new markets and the loss of some of those markets, the loss is very big because you've spent a lot of time and a lot of money building those relationships and building that trust to be able to ensure that your product arrives safely and securely, and you're not going to, have somebody try and manipulate you on the other end.
That's a good kind of segue to the next question. And then we had talked about this. We first, when you and I first did this panel together, it was at Maine International Trade Day back in May when we were sitting up at the Samoset. The tariffs hadn't happened yet.
It was still a pretty rosy picture.
It was still a fairly rosy picture. I think we were kind of sitting there going, well, this isn't really going to happen, right? I mean, there's no way this is going to happen. Cooler heads are going to prevail, and we'll kind of get this figured out. But that didn't actually happen. We were wrong. I'm big enough to admit that. We were wrong. There were things that did happen after Trade Day. By the way, we're never picking any markets, because every time we pick a market for trade day, something bad happens. But the unavoidable tariff question, which of course I've got to ask you here, just to briefly recap for the audience. So on July 6th, in the third round of Chinese retaliation against the U.S. for our $250 billion worth of tariffs, we had kind of dodged it. The first two waves really were aimed at the Midwest. They were going after things like Harley-Davidson motorcycles, soybeans, other things. The third round, however, was what struck the lobster industry. China added lobster to the retaliation list. Obviously, it affected a lot of your companies. As you said, and the Trade Center too, we've spent a lot of time and effort working with companies in the industry to get them into the Chinese market. How is that going? Like, how is the industry made adjustments now that we're kind of 6 months into this new environment?
So the China tariffs were announced, the retaliatory tariffs were announced on June 16th for a July 6th implementation. And for the first half of the year of 2018, we know now that our exports to China were up about 125%. So the potential for the continued growth into that market was pretty promising. And then on June 16th, I would say for the next 3 weeks, every lobster company, and this is really a thing that has impacted live lobster shippers more than value-added processors. The value for the product in China is live lobster. So for the live lobster shippers in not only Maine, but in Massachusetts and other parts of the U.S., this has been a very big deal for them. For those 3 weeks between June 16th and July 6th, people were scrambling to get as much product to their customers, and customers were scrambling to get as much product as they could get. We have seasons in the lobster industry. We do not have seasons in Maine, but there are seasons in Canada. And so the Canadians do not fish during the summer. So the option, if you're looking for fresh caught lobster in the summertime, is Maine. It is Massachusetts. And so the product had to come from the U.S. to get that really good quality product. And so for those next 3 weeks, everybody did whatever they could to put lobsters on planes and get them to market. And then it just, was pretty much radio silence for a lot of companies. Each company is set up differently. China is a greater value for some than others, and so different businesses have felt this differently, but I would say by and large, it has not been good for the industry.
It was interesting to watch because obviously we see it from the working and counseling with the companies, but also see the export data, and we absolutely saw that. Like in June, there was a huge spike, and then it just sort of, as everybody tried to get everything out the door as quickly as they could. Kent, you and I had talked a little bit about how the tariff environment is affecting you, and not so much on the steel and aluminum side, I don't think, but the tariff environment has kind of gotten into your thinking as well about how you approach the international market.
Well, fortunately, our industry, the optoelectronic instrumentation industry, was only impacted with a 5% tariff. Not significant, yet it represented an opportunity when the tariff was announced for not only our industrial and commercial sales agency in China, but also our ocean or marine sales agencies to buy in, similar to what you experienced, Annie, in advance. And the bigger threat was a 25%, I think, January 1st, which of course hasn't come to pass. So it was, even China's an important market. It actually boosted our sales a little bit, maybe perhaps just timing, but the real risk was that last fall when we were looking toward 2019 and trying to budget and make contingency planning, should that impact fluid imaging, but so far so good.
I imagine, Kevin, obviously IDEXX has a lot of big, you kind of go through a lot of scenario planning, whether it's the tariff industry or on Brexit. One of the things that we talked about, Brexit was supposed to have happened last Friday. It's been delayed until at least next week. It's feeling a bit like that Katy Perry song about being hot and cold, yes and then no, in and then out, up and then down.
Yeah, it's a lot to...
It's a lot to kind of handle, So I wonder if you might spend a couple times talking about that and how IDEXX has been preparing, because, all kidding aside, I told my daughter I'd get Katy Perry into this somehow, that IDEXX has been preparing for this, but a lot of companies are having to think about this, disruptions to supply chains, something that companies are spending a lot of time thinking about, and I know that you have been.
Yeah, so maybe I'll start off by just kind of giving the context of, the size of IDEXX and kind of where we're at. So, and what that means in terms of each of these issues, whether it's tariffs or Brexit. So we're currently in nearly 200 countries. We're in all 7 continents in space, if you count the water testing at the space station. Over 2.5 billion people every day drink water that's protected by IDEXX tests. And so we have if you're in that many different countries and that many different scenarios, you have to start looking at each one of those. When you talk about the tariffs, they've had limited impact because we're spread out across the global enterprise. When you talk about Brexit, the UK represents 4% of total revenue for IDEXX. And so we pay very close attention, and of course, being a customer-focused company, we pay close attention to those customers in the UK, and we work to see, okay, what would be the worst-case scenario that might happen? For example, if there is a hard Brexit last Friday, we had spent the last 3 or 4 months preparing for that event as a worst case. What could we possibly do to minimize the impact to our customers? That became across the entire company with our European partners, particularly our shipping partners, to see how we might offset any delays. And so we spent a lot of time doing that scenario planning to make sure that no matter what happened, we'd be able to support our customers and get them the product as soon as they ordered it. So that's the kind of thing that I think most companies do. They spend a lot of time on that scenario planning, and then they're ready to execute regardless of what happens. So we'll continue to monitor that situation, but like you said, it's a little up and down and hot and cold. It's hard to know exactly what will happen in the next 2 weeks. Right. Thanks.
So we're going to shift gears a little bit, from the goods okay, this is all the things that are going on. So so you're all experienced in doing business in Maine. You're all from Maine or spent a pretty significant amount of time here. What advantages do you find when you go abroad that Maine and Maine companies kind of bring to the international market that allows us to kind of compete internationally? And I'm looking at Kent, so we'll start with Kent.
Well, for a lot of countries, made in USA carries a lot of weight, particularly in Asia. For some of our applications, the U.S. Research market and standards hold sway over what they do in many other countries. For example, we comply with U.S. FDA requirements, and almost every other country that's involved in biopharmaceutical research and production follow the U.S. FDA. So it's very important to us in that regard.
That's great. Kevin.
Slightly different tack. I think I would say, in terms of being a destination, Maine is a destination for many people. And so when you're looking to hire or bring people into Maine, Maine being a great place to live and work, that's a great incentive. And so I think that's probably one of the greatest advantages of being here in Maine. It's the people and the attraction for other people to come to the state.
And Annie.
I would say when you're looking specifically at the lobster industry and food products, the food safety component is really important, especially, again, when you think about Asia. I mean, people are really looking because for anybody who has been to China, you've flown over like incredible power plants and you've seen the smog and experienced air quality. Chinese consumers are really looking for healthy products that come from like wonderful places, and lobster fits that perfectly.
And you'll notice from the video that this is actually, I didn't intend it this way. Of course I did. When we showed the video, I mean, this was, I think, originally made for a mission that we were doing to China. But you'll notice that you're seeing a lot of clean water, a lot of people enjoying the outdoor recreation. People, you see the lobster coming out in the trap, and then you see it getting cooked. I mean, there is no doubt that this is something that we're able to sell abroad too. For the education industry, which you also saw as part of that video, we also talk about the safety that Maine offers people when they're thinking about frankly shipping their 14-year-old halfway around the world to go to school. They want to know that they're going someplace safe. Those are the things that kind of resonate for us. The flip side of that question, of course, is the challenges that you're finding in expanding your international presence. And Kevin, I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned workforce or Maine as a place to attract workforce, because I expected you guys, and as I mentioned before, you'd seen the questions beforehand. I sort of expected that workforce as being a challenge to expanded international presence might be an answer. It actually wasn't, although you may not have been thinking necessarily in that direction. But I wonder if you guys might talk about what challenges you're finding in expanding your international presence. And I'll start with Annie, actually, and we'll go down this way.
I think the challenge now is trying to find the carrying capacity that we used to experience in China and other places. And yes, I mean, the US market is still good for lobster, but you can't make up that loss of the Chinese market overnight. And so there are a lot of businesses that are working very hard to try and continue to develop markets that are sort of growing right now in places like Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong. We are also, in addition to China, dealing with a bit of a tariff situation in Europe. The Canadian Free Trade Agreement that was developed with the European Union back in 2017 has had an impact on our businesses as well. So, maintaining your relationships with those European customers is very important. But continuing to do whatever we can in developing markets, the Middle East, Southeast Asia it's big for us right now.
Kevin, one thing that actually, you mentioned, I'm sure I'm going to make you say this, but one thing that I thought was really interesting that you mentioned in the answers that you gave me was that IDEXX actually has a code of ethics that you moved down through the supply chain, and you found that was something, finding suppliers that could meet that was kind of an interesting one. I wonder if you might expand on that, or if you've got other thoughts on challenges.
No, that's actually one of the aspects of it for sure, right? Is that when you're in so many different countries around the globe, that our code of ethics is something that we're very proud of, and we want to make sure that anybody that we do business with will also hold to that same standard. And that's not always easy in terms of making sure that every single one of our partners is also compliant with our own code of ethics. We hold them accountable to that, and so that's been difficult in certain parts of the world. And then the other part that's probably most difficult, the biggest challenge, is making sure we're in compliance with every single local rule or law. And those are changing constantly. So not only are we in compliance today, but are we aware of a change that might take place and that we're still compliant tomorrow. And so we use a lot of our resources and time to make sure that we stay in compliance with each of those countries where we do business.
175 different markets, that's not an easy task to kind of stay on top of.
No.
Yeah. I've seen things, man.
Yeah.
So Ken, you know what question's coming. What challenges are you seeing on the international environment?
Well, from a practical standpoint, we're a small business and it's a big globe. As I mentioned, 2/3 of our business is outside the United States. So to support and grow that business, we need to be hyper-focused on gaining the mind share of the representative firms that sell our product. So in terms of communications, I mentioned earlier, but travel, participate in their domestic trade shows or join them on product demonstrations. That's how we have been building our business. But it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of travel. It's wear and tear on the employees. Yet there's a significant payoff in terms of educating the potential applications and having our reps up to speed on selling the instrument. But when that's done, the results have been very positive.
That's great. So is there a piece of advice that you'd give to one of the small companies out here today about if they're thinking about going global, something that they should do, something they shouldn't do?
Thank you for that question. And I really like to address. And the answer is I'm very bullish on international trade for a small business in Maine or large business even. But I would recommend that if you have any interest in this, talk to a colleague, talk to Maine International Trade Center, join Maine International Trade Center, have them weigh in on where they see your product or service most strategically interesting to target countries. Participate perhaps in your STEP program, which is funded, is a funding program to offset some of the expenses of going to an international trade show. Secondly, I'd recommend if you go to a trade show, even domestically, certainly internationally, advertise that you're looking for distribution. So you may go to a show in Chicago or Orlando and put a placard in your booth that you're looking for distributors. And believe me, because we've done it for years, they find you, because these rep firms that I reference come to the big domestic shows looking for new products to take to their country. So half your job is done, and that's what I'd recommend.
Yeah, that's great. Kevin, how about you? A must do or a must don't?
Well, that depends for each and every company, right? So it's a pretty big decision, a strategic decision about where you want to take the company. I think I would appreciate your point of view in terms of where you might want to go, but then for every company, you're going to have to make the right decision. You know, there's market research that needs to be done. There's, you know, distribution models that you're going to need to come up with. There's a lot of work that you want to do on the front end before you actually execute your international strategy. So do the planning work up front. Find the different resources, like you mentioned. Talk to colleagues. Talk to find Wade and his team to make sure that you've got the latest information and the latest pitfalls that other companies have run into, so you can learn all the lessons up front. Once you have that plan in place, then you can execute. But I'd say spend the time doing your research and being prepared for that decision, knowing exactly how you want to execute in that international marketplace.
Great. Annie?
I would just echo that. It's, I think about this. I took a trip to Dubai about a year and a half ago, and it was something that I had developed both with the Trade Center and with different industry groups have different support systems beyond the state of Maine. So in the food business, it's Food Export, which is located here in the Northeast region that supports businesses meeting their export markets. And I worked directly with a consultant in Dubai who helped me prepare this very comprehensive market analysis of not just Dubai, but the entire Middle East region, planned out businesses that I needed to engage with and things along those lines. And it was an incredible experience and much deeper than one that you get just going to a trade mission or a trade show alone.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, definitely do your homework and know your resources. I think is a good one. Not to be self-serving. I appreciate the plugs here. We also work a lot. Our organization works a lot with attorneys and banks and the kind of internationally active service providers within Maine that support our staff, but also support our staff in supporting all of you and all of you in doing the work. It's definitely a team effort. So. And making sure that you've got those resources in place before you go is a really important thing. So that's it for my questions. I'm happy to take some from the audience. I think we've got a few minutes. I'm looking down at the chamber folks, and no one's given me the hook yet, so that's good. So happy to take your questions. But thank you so much to the panel. I thought that was fantastic. So there are microphones out there, and we're happy to take your questions. And as Jack said, excuse me, if you could say your name and your organization when you get up to the microphone, that would help us give an intelligent answer. So let's look out there. I see somebody coming right over here.
Good morning. Is this on? My name's Kimball. I work right here at Holiday Inn by the Bay, so welcome. It's great to have you here. So I noticed a lot of the talks centered on China and Europe, and I wondered if South America was a big player or if there's a reason why they're not. Maybe their economy is not big enough, or if we do trade with them.
Excuse me. Latin America is interesting. Maine in general, as far as international companies are concerned, generally are fairly small, and what that means is they tend to go to markets that they, with the exception of these guys up here, obviously, they tend to go to markets where they feel comfortable and actually markets that they can get to easily. It's pretty easy from Maine to go east or west, believe it or not. It's pretty easy to get to China. It's pretty easy to get to Europe. It's not so easy to get to South America. And so the mental linkages, I don't think necessarily head in that direction. That is not to say that they are not good markets. We've actually done 2 or 3 trade missions down there in the past. We went to Mexico, Chile, Colombia, and Brazil sometime in the last 5 or 6 years. And we actually had some good companies that came along with us. It tended to be more in the kind of the niche manufacturing space. They're definitely on top of mind, but they don't tend to hit that first tier like places like China, Canada, and Europe.
We did a reverse trade mission with Brazil that the Trade Center coordinated in the summer of 2016, I think. And I mean, you're right. There were some incredible, like, major grocers and distributors for seafood that came to that event, but the logistics and the cold chain coordination is just not there. And the strength of the Brazilian economy is not strong enough for us to really be able to go out, you know, great guns, going to tackle that market. But people were definitely interested. But there are a lot of things that I think that need to happen both on the U.S. side and then on the Brazilian side to improve the potential for that market growth, specifically for the perishable business.
Yeah. Kevin, I know you guys are active down there too, right?
Yeah, certainly. Didn't mention Latin America, certainly not by design. Certainly we would include that as part of our global operations. Latin America is very important to a company like IDEXX, and we continue to grow our operations in that area, particularly in Brazil and other parts of South America and Latin America. So we look for every opportunity where it exists for that kind of growth. We're growing certainly in the United States and around almost every other country in the world as well. But yeah, Latin America is very important part of our growth.
Of the 25 commission sales agency firms, 4 are in Latin America. We analyze algae in the ocean. They analyze algae in the ocean in Brazil. We work on produced water in the oil and gas industry here in the United States. They do also down in South America. And what's really interesting of late is the increased importance of our instrumentation in aquaculture. Specifically in salmon farms in Chile. They want to use our instruments to monitor for upcoming harmful algal blooms, which will kill their entire fish pens overnight. So it's not huge, but it's important.
Sounds like a trade mission to South America coming. is what I think I'm hearing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Over here. Thank you.
Good morning, Matt Steicher with Garen Molenkamp Marketing Agency. Hi, Annie.
Hi, Matt.
Nice job, everyone. Thank you very much for a really interesting discussion. My question is actually going back to one that was asked just a couple of minutes ago about the advantages of doing business of Maine. What advantage does Maine give you? And some of the answers I heard were more US-based, as in made in the USA or with the FDA, et cetera, as opposed to specifically Maine. And I was just curious, is there an individual or an organization that's responsible for managing, creating, curating a Maine brand that all of you leverage in some way, whether that's a tourism brand or an economic development brand? Do you all talk about Maine in some way?
Go ahead, Ken.
The first word that comes out of anybody's mouth is lobsters.
Yeah, it's true.
That is the icebreaker in any international conversation. So to your point, I believe as seemingly insignificant it is, it's on their top of mind, and it's oftentimes a lead into a conversation, icebreaker, and build a relationship from there. So to that extent, being in Maine is of value. But certainly, as Kevin mentioned, the workforce is strong. And indirectly, when we need to look outside Maine for additional team members, knowing that Maine is, and Portland specifically, is developing a fantastic reputation as a place to be, and southern Maine in general, the region as a place to live and work, all is supportive and of bringing new team members to Maine and building the business.
Does that answer your question?
Sure does. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Good morning. Susan Morris, New Height Group here in Portland. Thank you for the conversation this morning. I too want to pick up on a bit of a theme, and what I'd like to hear your comments are on whether you see strength in a cluster strategy here in Maine. And by that I mean going beyond lobsters to oysters to kelp, et cetera, the aquaculture, the vet med, whatever. And specifically for the people in this room, can you give us examples of where you've seen other companies start up because they're piggybacking on the industries and the businesses that you have? And do you think that for Maine to have, would Maine have a better competitive position in the global marketplace if we strategically looked at a cluster strategy around water quality, et cetera, et cetera? So you get my drift. If you could speak to that, that would be super. Thank you.
I'll tackle this one. So yes, we do, and I think that one of the things that the Trade Center does, obviously, is we're in the business of promoting Maine as a place to do business, but also the companies that that exist here. We look a lot for, I guess we could call them clusters, groups of companies that are internationally active. They're ready to go. They are, maybe not a cluster in a classic sense, because we may be missing pieces of the cluster, but are able to promote, say, an industry sector abroad at a time. So we might, we just got back, we just did a food and ag show in California. We do this with the lobster and the seafood industry. I should say the seafood industry. It's not just the lobsters that attend shows in Brussels, Boston, and Hong Kong. We are also, my colleague Tom Conley's out here somewhere. Tom is working on defense diversification, working with companies in the defense supply chain to help find opportunities in the U.S. and outside the U.S. to kind of diversify away from just selling into the U.S. Department of Defense. So it's absolutely part of the strategy of thinking about, can we promote individual companies like IDEXX and Fluid Imaging and Annie's members, but can we also promote the industry as a whole, either as, we want to talk about Maine lobster. Sorry to keep going back there, but we want to talk about Maine lobster. We don't care who you buy from, but we want to make sure that you're buying the resource. Or to be able to say, the lobster industry is a particularly strong place where you might want to put your investment dollars, or composites industries, or advanced materials, or any of the other ones that we work with. So it's absolutely part of the strategy, for sure. See somebody over here?
Hi, Tucker
We've got time
Emerson.
for one more question.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
I thought I was hearing double there. Tucker Emerson with Kepler Technologies. I was wondering if you could speak to a little bit more of the international markets that are kind of closer to home. So Canada is a pretty big market. I'm wondering if you could talk to what Maine's relationship is and maybe each of your individual businesses.
Well, the context is that Maine is our leading export market. They are our leading trade partner. They account for about 50% of what the state exports goes to Canada every year. And if you broke New Brunswick and Quebec out individually, they would be number one and number two. They would be ahead of China and the rest of Canada. So it's an incredibly important market statewide. But I will flip this to my panelists to talk about how it works individually for you.
So in the lobster industry, we have companies that are set up on both sides of the border, both in very formal situations where there is direct ownership of operations on both sides of the border, or informal relationships because of the need for the access to the supply, because of the nature of the seasonal aspect of the business. But in light of our recent trade situations that we're dealing with, especially with regard to China, we have looked to Canada to absorb some of the product here. So we are shipping product to Canada, and the Canadians are then dealing with it for value-added product, or are exporting lobsters live out of Halifax or Moncton to reach further markets. And so that relationship has always been very important for our industry and will continue to be important moving forward.
Yeah, I can just add to that. I mean, Canada's an important partner. With IDEXX, right? So we have a large market there. We have our own distribution center in Canada so that we can move product easily to all of our customers. And it's easy to do business there. So we've been, it's not that it's a more important market than any other, but it's a very important one, of course, for our company.
For fluid imaging, we sell a lot of flow cams into Canada for the application of either marine or freshwater research. Canada is probably one of the most aggressive government policies toward funding research. And as a result, it's a great country, significant for fluid imaging. In fact, there are more flow cams per capita in Canada than any other country in the world. Wow. Fun fact of the day.
Thank you.
That knocked out my issues with eggs and Katy Perry and everything.
There you go.
bookends.
Yeah, bookends, there you go. Well, with that, I think this is it. I think that was our last question. So thank you so much. I'd like to thank our panel, Annie, Kevin, Kent.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thanks to the Portland Chamber and to Jason Lundy for getting us up here today. Be sure to grab a Trade Center member or one of us afterwards if you have other questions. We'd be happy to answer them. We're happy to help and do whatever we need to do. Hope we'll see you on May 24th at Trade Day. Thanks to all of you for coming. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Quincy.
Thank you.